Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen, Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Yeah.
Hey, Chris and Gene.
What could this be? Ah, it's a Limehouse Blues.
Hey, Ashley. Evening, Dina and Laura. Hey, Maria in New York City. Hey, Denise, Becky, and Kathy. Hey, Amy, Patty. Hey, Larry and Laura, and Andrea, Miguel, Augustin. Hey, Dad. Hey, Jerry. Trish and Karen and Bruce. Hey, everybody. Evening, Karen and Barbara. Hey, Gina. Hey, Marita. Hey, Ann. Hey, Diane and Bruce. Bill. Hey, MJ over on YouTube. Sunshine. Nancy and Chuck. Hey, LaKrieger, Nancy, and Octavio. Hey, Katie. Hey, Uncle Dave. Hey, Marie. Hey, Samantha, Karen. Hello all around. Glad to have you back, Lauren. Hey, Eric, Jenna. Christine and Susan and Gladys. Hey, Bob, it was a pretty cool one this morning, I bet you say so. Hey, Lucian. Hey, Susan. Hey, Mike. Yeah. Hey, Steven. Hey, Alexandra and Aviva. Hey, Jean. Hey, Georgia. Hey, Jerry, speaking of architectural boat tours, we'll be announcing the late tour for October 1st pretty soon.
That's what you call a powerhouse.
August and I am drinking Jepson's bourbon. Hey, Eileen. Hey, Rodney. Evening, Robert. Hey, Kim. Glad you made it home in time. Mary, difference between Art Deco and Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau came earlier and tends to have a lot more intricate patterns. Hey, Heather. Hey, Tom. Hey, Maureen. Randall. 2 Marines in a row. Hey, Dave. Ronnie, this is the Board of Trade. Hey, Susan and Nipur. Kathy, I don't think I am. I just had 2 Marines in a row, now I got 2 Kathys in a row. Hey, Melissa. Hey, Rob. Hey, William. Ellen. Hey, Jordana. Hi, Donna. Hey, Joanne. I never really thought up a good line to explain Art Deco versus Art Nouveau. Is this a homework assignment? It's like one of those emails I get. I really love your book, so-and-so. Can you please tell me what the rising action is? Hey, Betsy, Cheryl, and Susan. Hey, Samantha. And you shall. Hey, David. Hey, Pamela. Laura, I also hate it when that happens, and for some reason when I've been moderating on the effing group, we only see like 2 comments at a time. It doesn't give me a very large thing to work off of. It drives me nuts. Hello, Mary. Mike, no, I do not. Hey, Tony and Cindy and Paula. Hey, Diane.
Give our faithful Cedars Flat.
Hey, Cindy.
Hi-ho, Silver.
Hey, Molly. Evening, John. Hey, Megan. Always good to have the whiskey in hand. Jacqueline, I hear ya. Octavio. He said. Kathy, hope the surgery went well, but since you're here, it must have done fairly well. Hey, Linda. Hey, Sandy. Hey, Grace. Hey, Lori. Well, Miles is sitting in his box over here, so he's just kind of waiting around. Rodney, it is practically a requirement that I drink on duty. When I worked for one of the boat tour companies, officially, of course, I could not drink on duty, but if they had me working too many tours in a day, my rule would be my last tour is the martini tour, where I switch to my other water bottle. Hey, Bob.
As long as we're driving out west here, well, let's stop and have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset. Right?
Hey, Jenny. Hey, Pam. Hey, Paula. Hey, Donna. Hey, Lynn and Kenosha. Well, you know, in those days when I was doing several tours a day, I think I would do like 150 boat tours in one summer, and it was the same every time. So it got to be where it's you know, I could mix things up a little bit, or I'd have to change around a bit based on the river traffic, but pretty much it was the same thing every time once I had a routine worked out. So it kind of got to be a thing like, how much can I drink and still be able to get the tour exactly right? Donna, this is Earl Father Hines, live at the Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. Building's still there, but it's a beauty shop now. Well, I will pass that to Ronnie for sure. Oh, and speaking of books, University of Chicago Press have told me they have a price in mind for the Graceland book. It will be $19.95, which for academic publishing is better than I was hoping for. Hey, Mom. All right, Jacqueline. Always good to get away from work. Hey, David.
For the words, we turn on now to the next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Hey, Marcia. We'll give Earl Father Hines one more song. We'll wait to see how many people log on. Uncle Dave, I don't know if I know that particular Des Moines building. No, I don't have pre-order yet on the Graceland book yet. Hopefully pretty soon, though. I know that over the course of the Mystericon, they gave me, well, you're going to have 4 weeks to do your revisions and editing. And then, like, it takes place right during the Mystericon. Hey, Stuart in New Zealand. Hey, happy birthday to 3 Mysterians, I see. Hey, Ann. Hey, Ryan. Alright, I'm going to shut the mail program down. So if anybody has tech support, they're kind of out of luck. Hey, Mary in Nashville. Happy Thursday, Veronica and Hanahan. Hey, Monica. Hey, Veronica on YouTube. Well, yeah, those ones that say that they're $900 on Amazon, it usually means they don't have any available. Nobody's actually selling it for $900. There's some weird thing about the Amazon with the, there's some weird thing about it with their algorithm for books they don't actually have. Hey, Mia. Hey, Linda on Twitch. Hey, Katie. Giving it just another minute for everybody to log on here. We'll wait till Earl Father Hines finishes this great tune. Finishes this particular bit of jive, as the DJ would say. Hey, Tracy. Well, you know, there are a couple of my books where the first print one was only like 300 copies, so a first edition copy is exactly as rare as a Shakespeare First Folio. Hey, Mark. Audrey, your comments are showing to me. I see them.
Well, we're about halfway.
All right. Okay, so that was Earl Father Hines, everybody. Hi, Catherine in the South Loop, and that means it is time for us to get started. All right, welcome along, everybody, to Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time, so I am, in fact, incredibly famous. Amongst my books are Mysterious Chicago, the book, Just Kill Me, which is about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. It's mostly fiction. And The Smart Aleck's Guide to American History. But one of the fun things about switching to virtual tours, as we did last year, is I can do a lot of things that I could never really do as an in-person tour. Like, a tour of Art Deco buildings in Chicago are scattered all over the city. There's really no way I could do this in one tour. Even if we got a bus, it would be a pain in the butt to get from point A to point B. And some of them look better during the day, some of them look better at night. By doing it virtually, we're not really bound by these kind of geographical limitations. So, let's talk a little bit about what is Art Deco. Before we talk about what is Art Deco, really, we have to go way back in history to talk about the earlier art forms like Beaux-Arts. I always want to give that like a highfalutin French pronunciation. Beaux-Arts. Okay, I will see the comment to fix my collar. Oh yeah, this collar is all kinds of messed up, isn't it? All right. This is the Yacht Club in New York City, where everything kind of looks like it's melting. This is emblematic of the Beaux-Arts style that was popular in the late 19th, early 20th century. Very ornate, lots of statues and stuff. Around the early 20th century and late 19th, we also had the Chicago School, like the Marquette building here, which did away with a lot of the ornamental flourishes and just made something a little bit neater, a little bit cleaner. Around the same time, we also had the Prairie School, which had a big emphasis on horizontal lines, like at the Roby House here by Frank Lloyd Wright. Then we have some stuff around that same time period, the 1910s, that are kind of a mixture of the two. This is the Equitable Building in New York City, the one that was so big that they worried that it was going to start blocking out the sun. So right around the time that this stuff, the old Beaux-Arts style was going out of style, they got worried that buildings like this were literally going to block out the sun. New York made a law that said buildings had to get narrower as they got taller. That's why you see so many buildings there that are kind of like that ziggurat pattern. Now, Chicago followed suit in 1923. This is a diagram from the building code saying how far back things had to go based on how high up they got. Now, this wasn't on the books for very long. There's any number of buildings that go way above 198 feet or way above 66 feet especially that don't really have any setbacks because we're not quite as worried about the sun being blocked out as we were anymore. But this became just something that happened to fit the aesthetic of the new style of architecture that was emerging at the time in the early 1920s too, the style we now know as Art Deco. As seen here in a couple of New York buildings, you can see these ones getting narrower, the Empire State Building on the right and the Chrysler Building over here on the left. Art Deco had more of a streamlined verticality. It was a lot of clean lines, kind of emphasized the height of the building when it was a tall one. One of the boat tour companies I worked at, they always wanted to say it has soaring lines to to reflect the soaring optimism of the 1920s. Except that nobody thought of the 1920s as an optimistic era during the 1920s. It was only in hindsight they started thinking like that. But this did emphasize a time when buildings were suddenly getting a whole lot taller. A generation before, you didn't hear of a building over about 10 stories high. All of a sudden, you had buildings like the Chrysler and the Empire State that were pushing up over 1,000 feet tall. And also in these cool, clean, jazzy lines. This is the architecture of the Jazz Age. A lot of simple geometric art. But they do borrow a few things here, like the Prairie School architects were much more into horizontal than vertical, but they like to have a lot of little touches that subtly reflected what went on inside of the building. You can see that here in the Chrysler Building, where the top looks like tires, a whole stack of tires, reflecting that this was Chrysler Motors. Now, you also see the style in things like, I always call it the Superman style. It's the style of architecture you see with things like the Daily Planet building, which didn't really come about in the comics until really after Art Deco had kind of had its day. The fact that Daily Planet building itself, though, was said to be based, well, there's any number of buildings that claim to be the basis of the Daily Planet building. One of the better guesses is the Paramount building in New York, which was once the home of the Paramount Theater, a little musical called The Music Man debuted there. Currently the home of the Hard Rock Cafe Times Square, where I end up having to eat more often than I care to tell when I'm working with school groups, but those guys can handle a school group like nobody's business, and they've got the drums from Dylan's 1966 tour. The style bled over into pretty much everything in the 1920s and 1930s. You saw it in clocks, you saw it in radios, you saw it in magazines. This is the Chicago, and a really cool magazine that was sort of the Chicago's answer to the New Yorker. Had a lot of fun articles by guys like Arthur Meeker Jr., who turn up here quite a bit. Designs like this. These jazzy, jazz-age designs showing a few of the buildings here. Here you can see a little bit of... Looks like I think that's supposed to be the Lasalle Wacker building there. No, that's the Jewelers building, which was not Art Deco itself, but here's how the Jewelers building would look if it were Art Deco. And then over to the left, you can see a bit of the Wrigley building. Also not Art Deco, but that's how it would look if it were Art Deco. There's also some fun advertisements in here from the 1920s and early 30s, like this ad for Crush Dry. This was the era of Prohibition, so Orange Crush Soda was now selling something called Crush Dry, which almost tasted like booze, but in fact was not. You know, they just took orange soda and made it, kind of yucky, I guess. It's always fun to go pouring through these things. You get more almost from the advertisement than you do from the articles themselves in these things. So... Chicago, of course, started building its own. We think of Art Deco really as a New York thing in a lot of ways. The rule about buildings getting narrower as they got taller is much more on display walking around New York. But we do have plenty of fantastic examples here in Chicago as well. And we will start with the Board of Trade building. The one we've been looking at for the intro of this whole tour. This is possibly my favorite one, 1930 by Halliburton and Root. The successor company to Halliburton and Roche, a couple of guys who came out of William LeBaron Jennings' office, which built the first modern skyscraper right to our left on the site where a building that we'll talk about later is now. So the Board of Trade, you can see here, not only does it get narrower as it gets taller, but also there's another thing that they were able to do in Art Deco buildings that they hadn't really been able to do before, is the setbacks allowed them to have banks of light, to have really dramatic lighting schemes lighting up the entire building. That was brand new. It still looks awesome now, especially when they light up the Board of Trade. It looks to me like something out of Batman. It's very Gotham City looking. In fact, this was the Bruce Wayne headquarters, or the Wayne Company headquarters in Batman Begins. You can see here's how it looked on the Chicago in itself. It's almost impossible to imagine how much more striking this would have looked in 1930. 1930, this was the tallest building in town by a couple of feet, held onto that title for a good 25 years, and also just having buildings all lit up like this must have just seemed endlessly futuristic and modern to people in a way that we probably can't even appreciate now. Here it is how it looks during the day. Still looks really cool during the day, honestly. But I love it how they have it like that. Now, up on top is a statue of Cyres, the Roman goddess of grains and agriculture, because this was the Board of Trade where they were selling grains and barley and rice and stuff. Now, it was sculpted by a guy named John Story. There's a lot of urban legends about it. Like, some people say the reason it doesn't have any facial features is because they thought that nobody would ever build another building as tall as this one again. You hear that a lot. It's kind of a misprint of a misquote of John's story. He did say in this article in the Chicago Tribune that as high up as it was going to be, most people wouldn't be able to get a clear look at its face anyway. But really, it was more just having a suggestion of features, was really just more of an Art Deco thing. The statue itself is Art Deco, a lot of clean lines. You might get away with calling it Art Moderne or Streamline Moderne with the curves on it, but it fits the Art Deco aesthetic. There you can see it doesn't have a face. But you can see this in other statues of the same era, such as, perhaps the most famous, the Oscar, which comes from about the same era. See the similarities there. And also it just kind of ties into Art Deco for one reason or another, really liked having really tall people built into stuff. Like down below at the Board of Trade are a couple of images of ancient traders, such as this guy on the left who looks like the back of Led Zeppelin 4, and the Native American on the right. These were both sculpted by a guy named Alvin Meyer. But also inside of like elevators of buildings of the era, you'd see the same thing with like tall figures. Or inside of the field, or this advertisement from the Chicago magazine from Marshall Field and Company. Very tall, slender woman. Tall people emphasize the tall buildings. We also see some of that at this next place, up on the north side, at the top end of Lakeshore Drive, and above Sheridan a little bit. The Mundelein College building, which is now just known as the Skyscraper at Loyola University. So you see that same pattern, that ziggurat shape, getting narrower as it gets taller. But up closer, you've got some very, very tall people. And also, I love the grill on there. That geometric pattern is very, very typical of Art Deco stuff. Simple geometric art. Made intricate just by having so many lines on it. But what you see with these is kind of an update of the old style that you would see in the old days with lots and lots of columns. Beaux-Arts style buildings had lots and lots of columns, especially Corinthian columns. What you see here is kind of an update on that. See, columns should be an Art Deco thing in a lot of ways. They're very clean lines, a lot of a streamlined verticality. But here, instead of topping it with like the crazy pineapple look that you see on a Corinthian column, you see it turn into a person. Very cool way to do it. Let's go all the way down to the other end of Lakeshore Drive. Down at the other end was the Palmolive Building. Now this one here is another cover of the Chicago and clean lines, but this one actually is Art Deco. You can see also the lights coming off at the top of it here. We'll cover this. It was a real trend in the Art Deco era to have beacons on top of buildings. Now here is the Palmolive back behind the Drake Hotel. Still lit up, and you can still see the beacon up top there. It wasn't turned on the day that I came out to film this. But the Palmolive Building is by Halliburton Root from 1929. Here it is during the day. Similarly, streamlined verticality, nice clean lines, gets narrower as it gets taller so they have a place to hold the banks for the lighting rigs. And this has been looking cool for years. George Henry High took this picture about the early 1920s. George Henry High is the grandson of a guy who was killed in the first Great Chicago Fire in 1857. Later on in the 1920s, he was a judge of several high-profile photography contests, where his co-judge was Amelia Earhart. Now, on top of this one, you can see this giant glowing beacon, and that was known as the Lindbergh Beacon. So in celebration of Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic that electrified people, again, in a way that we can't even really comprehend these days. But this beacon was said to be so bright that you could read by it in Wisconsin. And one guy even got up in a plane and flew out far enough over Lake Michigan that it was like the equivalent of flying to Wisconsin. I said, yeah, I could read by it okay. It's entirely possible. But there were a lot of wild stories told about beacons like this. Now, it was eventually turned off. It was really getting on the neighbors' nerves. It was turned off partly for a wartime measure. Then in the 70s, when they wanted to turn it back on, all the neighbors, and now that there were other tall buildings around it that would have been shining right at, were like, I don't think so. They eventually compromised that it's now still occasionally turned on, but it just beams out over the lake so it doesn't get in anybody's windows. There's a really gorgeous dramatic shot of it, more high contrast with the old water tower by William Boyington in front of it, and the Palmolive Building by Halliburton Root behind. Now this would have been a fairly early shot of it. This must have been early 1920s before pretty much anything else had been built on the north end of the Magnificent Mile. Then in the 1960s it became the Playboy Building for a while there. And you can see the beacon in action right there. And just up at the other end of the Magnificent Mile and take a right over onto Wacker, you come to another one, another Halliburton Root building from about the same time called the Lasalle Wacker Building. So named because it is at Lasalle and Wacker. This is where a couple of my downtown walking tours start. Let's get a couple of cool shots of this. Here's a night view of it from the Riverwalk. That armchair shape was very popular at the time. Cool shot of how it looks among the modern buildings, the 111 building and 77 Wacker, the United building at nighttime, with some dramatic filters. And here's an older view of it from inside a Chicago magazine. You'll notice on top of this, it's illuminated much more brightly back in those days than it is now, because they had their own beacon up on top of this one. This one you stop hearing about this one after about a year after it was built. But this is the Lasalle Wacker Building's Sun Flash Beacon. In the background, you can see the Palmolive Building with the Lindbergh Beacon. But this one was built much more cheaply. It was invented by a guy named Charles Nirvan. I can't read his name at the end there. But it was made out of, it was really just made out of mirrors. But it shone so brightly that according to the magazines at the time, Man-Made Star guides flyers. This one has a story about a pilot who took off from Toledo, noticed a strange light in the sky, and followed it all the way to Chicago, where he found out that it was the Sun Flash Beacon up on top of the Lasalle Wacker Building. But there was a problem with it. For one thing, bats and birds used to fly to their death in it. It became a daily chore to go and sweep up the dead birds on the roof. Got to be a problem. Plus, they got worried that it was going to be distracting pilots. So really, this one was in the news for about 2 weeks after they first installed it. Then after that, you just stop hearing about the Sun Flash Beacon altogether. There are a couple of good stories about the inside of this one, too. I can never just talk about the architecture. I've always got to talk a bit about the stories. After Capone went to prison, for a while they were operating under the leadership of Frank the Enforcer Nitti, who built himself an office inside of this place. He wasn't as good at hiding from the cops as Al Capone was. And the cops broke into that place and shot him up pretty good. Looked like he was going to die after they shot him, but he managed to pull through and live for, a couple more years. Longer than most gangsters did. There's an interesting article that came out of that. Empty stomach often saves gangsters. Gangsters always make a habit of, there's a quote at the bottom, I often wondered why gangsters and men who make a habit of living by the gun many times recover from wounds that should have proven fatal. I asked several of these men about it, and I discovered the reason. I investigated their stories through physicians and found them correct. Several men told me that when they go out to commit robberies or other crime, they always figure on the possibility of being shot. For that reason, they go without eating so that if they are shot, they are ready for immediate surgical attention. Interesting. May very well have saved Frank the Enforcer Nitti's life that day. There's also a guy who had an office there a generation later in the early 1950s by the name of Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc was a traveling salesman. He had an office in here for Prince Castle Sales. One of the things that he was selling was a thing called a multi-mixer, which was a milkshake machine that could make 8 milkshakes at once. which not a lot of restaurants really needed to make that many milkshakes at once, so it wasn't really doing that great. Till a little outfit out in California was buying 8 of them at once. He went out to see what it was, turned out to be the McDonald's. He wound up buying it from them outright, screwing them over pretty thoroughly, stealing most of their ideas and taking credit for all of them. There are sharks in the world, and he was one of those. So I often wonder, when they light it up all purple like this, it's probably not a reference to the Grimace, but I can never resist. In fact, he was in his office here when he called the McDonald brothers and said, I want to buy you guys out. So they said, okay, we'll call you back and give you a number. They called him back with an offer of something like $2.8 million, which they reasoned would be $1 million each after taxes. He paused for a second and dropped the phone, then picked it back up and said, did you hear that? That's the sound of me jumping out of the Lasalle Wacker building. Let's move right across the road from it is the Merchandise Mart. That one is by Graham Anderson, Probst and White from about the same time, 1930. Not really tall enough that we could call this a streamlined verticality, but you still see with the window banks, there's definitely a lot of vertical lines in this one. It's a little bit flashier than your average wholesale showroom anyway. And recently, they've just started bringing back the practice, or updating the practice, of having lights on the buildings with art on the Mart. We'll film a couple seconds of it here. It looks so much like a Tetris game going on here. I always feel like they could rig up an Atari there. We could all take turns playing Yar's Revenge. But one other building in Chicago, one of my favorite Art Deco ones, is not very well known, partly because you just can't get a good look at the thing very easily. But you can see rising up above the train tracks there. Because of the train tracks, as you get closer to it, your view is blocked. But this is the Trustee System Services building, designed by Thielbar and Reed in 1930. Best way to get a view of it is to go up the parking garage across the street. But by doing that, you actually get a really cool shot of this. That should be architecturally, I think that's one of the jewel in Chicago's crowns. It's just, unfortunately, not as well known as it should be, because unless you park your car on this garage, you probably don't, or work in one of these buildings over here, you probably don't get a very good view of it. Up close, you can see there's a lot of, well, here's an old ad for it. I always thought this was amusing. This, if you look up articles about it now, it always says that there was a speakeasy there back in the 1920s. Now, this was the Skyline restaurant. It was advertised in all of the advertising. It was essentially the in-house cafeteria. I don't know where anybody got the idea that it was a speakeasy. It's just one of those things. There was a place to get drinks there in the 1920s. They were probably just like orange juice and Coca-Cola. But that must mean it was a speakeasy, right? You run into this quite a bit. Now, if you look up close at the building, you can see a lot of these stylized versions of the caduceus, which I'm, caduceus. I never pronounced that right on the first try. But the caduceus is this image of 2 snakes going around a staff with wings and an orb on top. It is officially a symbol of commerce. Usually, the easiest thing to remember is 1 snake is doctors, 2 snakes is commerce. But they use 2 snakes for the medical profession and symbols like this in this country all the time. Then if you go down to the entrance, there's all of these things about being thrifty and being a hard worker are built right into the thing. Like things like, credit moves the modern business world. Now, this was, these frescoes were built by a couple of people named Gene and Gwen. Their last name just totally slipped my mind right now. But then it concludes on the inside, life punishes the thriftless. But then they also have this really, really awesome fresco. It's ironwork. Ironwork by a guy by the name of Ed Gibson. Now, you see all these ironwork images, and this would almost count as Art Nouveau, for those of you who are asking, of all these people just doing work. And when the train goes by on the outside of it, it almost makes it looks like it's animated, as though it's coming to life. I left the volume up so you can see hear the train go by there. Now, what it almost reminds me of, really, is something like a WPA mural, the kind of things that you used to see all the time, and still see occasionally, these murals but were the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, such as Bloom High School from 1931 by Royer, Danley, and Smith. This is a high school, Bloom High School, down in Chicago Heights, down in the south suburbs. And on the inside of this, well, it's a fantastic Art Deco building on the outside to begin with. On the inside, it's got these fantastic WPA-style murals of people doing the jobs that going to Bloom High School might prepare you for. You can see all of these going on. You can see people doing research science, doing just manual labor, we're doing the skilled trades. Really gorgeous murals. You also see some of them in like the Edgewater post office up here. I think there's the post office on Belmont has a few of them. This is we're talking about artisans. Now, this is the old ComEd Power Station by Halliburton and Root in 1931. Halliburton and Root, the rock stars of Art Deco design in Chicago, were also designing things like power stations. This one was so well built that they couldn't really tear it down when they put up Block 37, so it's still just kind of standing there as an empty building. But just above it, you know, they could have just made this a plain building and nobody would have complained. But instead they hired the artist Sylvia Shaw Judson, probably best known for Bird Girl, the statue on the cover of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, to do this magnificent fresco called The Spirit of Electricity, because it was an electrical power station. There's Bird Girl, her more famous one. Personally, I think this is way cool. The giant in the loincloth straddling the city with bolts of lightning. How'd you like to be up on the roof on a rooftop deck and looking up right there? Kind of reminds me in a way of the General Electric building in New York City, which has a lot of the similar designs, lightning bolts built into it, which fits in very well with Art Deco. Since we are in the loop and looking at Halliburton and Root stuff, let's zip around here to the river and check out the Chicago Daily News building. 1929 by Halliburton and Root, well, finished 1930. Now this one, you have to really get up close to see where it gets really cool. But like under the clock, there's these things like Faces by Alvin Meyer, same guy who did the stuff over at the Board of Trade building. Try to get in a little bit closer on some of these. But over along the edge here are these frescoes that pay homage to all of the greats of newspaper printing. Some of whom were distinctly like Mr. Pulitzer over there on the left from the New York World. Joseph Medill of their rival Chicago Tribune. That one I didn't get a good filming of in time. Plus they have these Art Deco takes on the Griffin architect artwork that you would see carved into buildings a lot in those days. This looks like it was a fountain that isn't presently working. And a few more great publishers like Victor Lawson of the Daily News, Horace Greeley. And the style of this continues on the inside. Like this is what the directory looks like on the inside. Really cool design. And right across from it, right across the river, is the Civic Opera Building, which is kind of like, I sometimes describe it as being kind of a Beaux-Arts style building pressed onto the frame of an Art Deco building. But we'll go over to the front of it. It's a little more elaborate than your average Art Deco, but it's still very much a building of the late 1920s. 1929 Graham Anderson Probst and White, to be specific. Let's get a little closer here. Like, in the walkway along the front, you see all of these columns. They're really a very streamlined Art Deco style take on a Corinthian column. Do a quick thing on Doric columns look like that, Ionic columns look like the letter I, and Corinthian columns look like a crazy pineapple. In this case, they've streamlined it down to be kind of an Art Deco take on a Corinthian column. And I love the Civic Opera Building. For one thing, their message board sign game is the best in the business. I remember when they were showing Carmen there, it was like, come see Carmen, we're bringing sexy back. Now we proceed around Wacker Drive. We will come to the old Chicago Post/Sun Times building by Halliburton Root from 1927. Now, this was the Sun Times building up until 1958 when they built this one across the river that was even worse looking. I think this is, of all the Sun Times buildings they've had, this is by far their best one. Here's a full view of it, kind of a whole portrait view. With, once again, kind of a streamlined take on columns up in the front here. These ones don't have anything on top. Normally there's a capital at the top of the column. Not in this case. See how I'm doing on time. If we go a little further down, we will come to 1 North Lasalle. Built on the site of the old Tacoma building, which has really awesome looking elevators on the inside, continuing the theme of very tall people, common in Art Deco stuff. This is one I couldn't really get a very good shot of. There's not a good place to stand to get a really good shot. Here's how it looked in the old architectural renderings. And apparently it too had a beacon on top of it, just very, very briefly when it was first built. I couldn't find too much about the beacon on this one, but apparently it had one. And just down the road from it is the Field building, now known as the Bank of America building, but built in 1930 by Graham Anderson, Probst, and White. On the site of the old home insurance building, which is sometimes considered the very first modern skyscraper. This is the home insurance building whose place it took. You can see the progression from roughly the Chicago School of Architecture to Art Deco. On the upside, a lot of these buildings have like a hidden club on the inside of them. This one has one called the Attic Club. This is the staircase that leads to it, that I think is absolutely stunning. Here's how it looks in the older renderings. Now, one thing that was also fairly new in the 1920s was people having cool cars. You know, horseless carriages had been around for about 20 years. The Model T had been around for a while. All of a sudden in the 1920s, people started having really cool looking cars. That started to be reflected in the architecture, including here at the Chicago Motor Club building, 1928 Halliburton Route. Nice clean lines. And then down at the bottom, it almost looks like a radiator grill on the front of it. Getting closer. Now this is now a hotel, but on the inside they've got one of the old cool looking cars. And over on the other side it kind of continues with this really great grill work. Kind of reflecting what the building was. It was a club, you know, it was a clubhouse at the time. At the time, everybody was a member of some club or another. You would have the Union League Club had its own building. The Athletic Club had its own building. The Motor Club had its own building. Zip over down on the south side in Hyde Park is the Ritz Garage Building, Art Deco by, now known as the Deco Arts Building, by Louis Croman. And this one here, you see, Scott was almost in miniature, what we talked about on the Chrysler building earlier. This was built as a luxury garage. They even had, like, shower facilities for the drivers. But built into it are a lot of little designs that call to mind automobiles, like tires. If you're not looking too carefully, it just looks like a geometric Art Deco design. Look a little bit closer and you see that you're looking at tires. They also have some really cool shots here, like building right into it. They've got these things that look like really cool touring cars of the era. Now, as I said, these things go into a whole lot of different, whole lot of different things besides just buildings in the 1920s and 1930s. But a whole lot of things besides just skyscrapers as well. Like way west at 5200 West Chicago is the Laramie State Bank building, which has been going through a lot of different plans for what to do with it next. You can see right now there's a deli in there, a furniture liquidator, and a Chinese restaurant. Originally, this was the Laramie State Bank, built with a lot of Egyptian elements to it. Now, this was also the 1920s they discovered King Tut's tomb, and that brought ancient Egyptian styles back in a really big way. They'd been big all through the Victorian era. This brought them back big time. You can see things like scarabs all over. This is Art Deco, but also looks like it might be a pharaoh's palace. Though not quite as clearly as up on North Clark Street, just a bit north of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre site, where you come to the Reby Moving and Storage Company, which is particularly Egyptian, even has the mummies out front, and a colorized version of Corinthian columns in a way. Move in a little closer here. See the scarabs, the mummies. There's hieroglyphics down here that say something like, "I will protect and guard your furniture." I wouldn't claim to be able to translate it myself. And then up here, you also see the caduceus, the double snake thing that we talked about before. Besides just moving and storage companies, you also saw Art Deco in things like funeral homes. Like the Grain Funeral Directors over on West Irving Park, with the clean lines and streamlined verticality, even though it's not exactly a vertical building. It gives almost the appearance of it. This one kind of needs to spruce up. Or in the West Loop, is the Richter Foods building. Now this has in common with the Laramie State Bank adding splashes of color. So often with buildings it's either just plain silver or just the plain beige. Adding a splash of color really helps, I think. And of course the most notable version of that here in Chicago by the Burnham Brothers, 1929, the Carbide and Carbon building, whose builders wanted to be the color of an old champagne bottle. Now, stylistically, it was made to look mostly like the American Radiator building in New York City, but there is a diary where they specifically say we wanted the color of an old green champagne bottle. Plus, it's gold up on the top, which kind of completes the champagne look. This is by Burnham and Burnham, Daniel Burnham's sons. Possibly my favorite building in Chicago. Another one that looks both awesome during the day and at night. And since it's virtual, we can see it both ways. It was the Hard Rock Hotel for the last several years. And now it's the St. Anne's Hotel? I forget which saint they're naming it after. A couple others to see is down in the Hyde Park area is the First Church. Built in a slightly curvier Art Deco style. And the Esquire Theater, which is kind of hidden behind new development now, but you can still see like the bones of it. Now this is not exactly Art Deco. This is what started to emerge in the 1930s as they added more curves. This is what became streamlined moderne or art moderne. Effectively, it's Art Deco with a little bit more curvature. But that started building up towards things with a lot more curvature and more space age stuff in the 1950s, the style that was known as Googie. But let's take a look at this is the triumph of streamlined moderne.
Here we are,
the World's
folks, at
Fair
Chicago's
of
world-famed
1933 that we had
Century
here
of
in
Progress.
Chicago.
The spectacular fair that was started by a beam of light from the star Arcturus. No less than 22 millions of them came swarming into this colossal show to witness the brilliant handiwork of its modern, unparalleled ingenuity. They create a picture that enthralls the eye with their sweep and majesty, a gorgeous climax to this vista of blue-green lagoon, the hope of design made real. Mingling with the brisk tone of modern America, we find, too, the spice and flavor of the foreign. Once it was Ferris wheel, but today it's the towering sky ride that offers the major thrill of the fair. Traveling across the lagoon, one saw far below
I don't know if you guys can hear the audio of this. I can't.
In a molten glow of brilliance, blues and reds and greens and yellows, all fused into a blazing kaleidoscope of color.
Fair.
Here's King Kong himself and two of his gentle playmates entertaining the midway crowds. And now we come upon a most unique structure, the Travel and Transport Building,
right there,
presenting a dominant phase of industry in its most commanding aspects, a triumph of architectural design and balance. And here is transportation in its most modern, thrilling expression.
Chrysler Motors.
The Temple of
Chrysler
Champions,
loved their Art Deco,
with its clean-cut lines and splashing fountains, mingling beauty with utility. In the shadow of this modern architecture, crowds come daily to see how
here,
cars
Chrysler
are
Motors
subjected to acid tests of endurance.
Showing off. This is effectively Test Track at Epcot, only you didn't get to ride it yourself.
And its saucer turns is the proving ground of car performance.
Susan Riverview existed at this time, on the other side of town. But all right, so that takes us past the Art Deco era. So it's time to plug the upcoming events. Saturday morning, we're going to be at Rose Hill Cemetery at 11 o'clock. Tickets are still available at MysteriousChicago.com. Next Saturday, we're doing the true crime version of the Graceland Tour. Now, that just means I'll focus a little bit more on some of the true crime stories as we go around, but we'll also include all of the greatest hits at Graceland as well. That'll be at 11:30. It's kind of crowded for tours that day. But that evening, we will be doing H.H. Holmes' The Devil Downtown, which meets up outside of the Lasalle Wacker building that we talked about today. Tickets for all of those are at MysteriousChicago.com. If you're at the Mysterious Chicago Regulars group, they have they and the Patreon have the link for the boat tour that we're doing for Mystericon on October 1st. There's only a small handful of tickets remaining, but I'll be announcing another one really soon for the same night, but later on. Next virtual tour is Sunday morning. That'll be Shopping in Chicago History, 10 o'clock, just like we do every Sunday morning. Should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, I'm just telling myself right now that the colder weather is coming. The colder weather is coming. CafePress.com/Mysterious Chicago has all of your stuff, including the new Mystericon shirts. And with that, everybody, I will put the Earl Father Hines back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Miles go anyway? I'll have to go find Miles in a minute. Hey, see you Saturday, Pamela. Thanks, everybody. Some of these architecture tours are tricky for me. It's really what I can do is like, well, here's the architecture. On a boat tour, when we go right past it, that's one thing. Thanks, Lisa and Amy. Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you, Ava. Ryan, sure, yeah, kids can totally go on the Graceland tour. Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, Tracy. Paula, boat tours are going to be October 1st. The one for 8 p.m., you can only get the link in the Patreon or the Mysterious Chicago Regulars group, because I told them I'd give them a head start. And they bought up just about all of the tickets now, so we're going to be adding another one that'll be more generally available. But since I already posted 2 new in-person tours today, I figured I should at least wait till tomorrow. Thanks, Chuck. How far south would I go for murals? I wouldn't go that far out of Chicago just to see a mural. It would have to be someplace I'm going anyway. Jordana, I love Art Nouveau too. Now, Mandy Crypt has a whole rant about how we don't have enough Art Nouveau in Chicago because of the Wrigley Building. Everybody was, even when Art Deco was taking over, around there on the Magnificent Mile, people were still largely building to fit in with the Wrigley Building. Kim, before the pandemic, we tried a couple of effing Chicago tours in person, but they didn't really sell at the time. But one of these days we will. We should definitely do a Mysterious Chicago get-together and a bingo hall. I have a whole series of pictures of me outside of signs that say there's going to be like bingo on Thursday, and I'm getting all super excited for it. Cindy, I haven't made it into a poster yet. I have to adjust like the dimensions and stuff. What am I going to do on October 4th? This crash. Happy birthday, Lindsay.
have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset. Aye.
Did I see the Dylan online performance? Yes, I did. It was magnificent. It was not really a performance. It was basically music videos to new recordings of old songs, but they were excellent. The filming was excellent. The performance was top-notch. I even immediately bought a zebra shirt to match his outfit. I'll tell you, the hybrid tour works pretty well. It's just kind of harder to arrange. Hey, Hen. Debbie, we will. You can always watch it later.
My very sweetheart, good night. Many moons have passed since I've gone.
Angie, Venmo over stars. Facebook takes a cut with the stars, I think. And I don't get them for a while. I think I'll finally get a stars payment in September. In the Colorado sunset, good night. If I could stop Facebook from pushing them so much, I would. But if they're more convenient for people, by all means.
We turn on now to the next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Good night, Eleanor. Let me make sure that I haven't got any angry letters from people with tech support issues. Doesn't look like it. That's good. Have a good night, Margaret. Oh yeah, whiskey and a cookie tomorrow for sure. Over on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page. At 6:30, Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. Miles is carrying his cat toy around, his cat dancer. I think he's sending me a message. Showing people how you jump? He carries it over, but one of them start playing with it. He just clams up, of course. Thank you, Tanya. Susan, I think so. Why is it the carrot on a steak trick? I'll be right back in 1 second.
this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of Earl Father Hines. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris to sing Now It Can Be Told.
Now it can be told in all its glory. Now that we have met, the world may know the sentimental story. The greatest romance they ever knew, waiting to unfold. Now it can be told as inspiration. Every other tale of boy meets girl is just an imitation. The great love story has never been told before, but now it can be told.
Sorry, guys. I'm back. Vivian, that's weird. I have no idea what the problem would be. I got Miles a little too riled up over here. Gary, I think they're alright. Really, it's just a matter of they wanted me to send a report for returns and my sales for the month of May, which is before the business license kicked in. It's like, well, obviously it's 0. See you, Audrey.
Softly, the tropic breeze blowing, rise with love like glowing beside a moonlit stream. Faintly, the waterfall is singing, loving arms are clinging beside a moonlit stream.
Thank you, Lisa.
My heart is a tom-tom.
Well, you know, Jeff, the new One Bennett Park building that just went up in Streeterville is very much an Art Deco building by Robert A.M. Stern Architects. So you can still see it occasionally.
You are mine completely beside a moonlit stream.
And Miles is being especially cheesy tonight. I don't think Miles has seen any gymnastics. Hey, but that's not, root canals are not too bad. They're not fun to pay for, and they're not fun to sit through, but they're not as bad as cartoons make them out to be.
Number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled, melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
Carrie, that was the Trustee System Services building, which is now apartments. As For all of their stuff, Trustee System Services made all this thing of all of their frescoes about hard work and the world punishes the thriftless. They went out of business after a couple of years. A couple of years after the thing was built. Vivian Aiden's good. He'll be moving in here for college very shortly. I'll have fun, Jay. That sounds awesome. Well, Tracy, that's good to hear. Steve Martin, be a dentist. All right, guys, by my count, that boat tour for October 1st is down to 6 tickets remaining. Thank you all so much for jumping on that. I'll announce the late tour just shortly. Oh yes, most of the H.H. Holmes videos out there are sheer rumors and urban myths. I guess there's a young adult novel coming out about a young woman who gets a job in his building. You can guess where this is going. I was talking dentist. I know I need to get to a dentist soon. I broke a crown like a year ago. I didn't do anything about it because it's not hurting and there's a global pandemic going. But boy, do I get lettuce stuck in that thing.
We rather imagine you'll hear that famous 7 brand.
Miles.
In Bambino.
Good one. Hope they can see that. Please say hi to the people, man. Scoop your right on up. I'll make that like 4 tickets left. But if you didn't get on this one, don't worry. There will be another one right after it, same night. That one will be more generally available. Right now it's like a private link, so if you're in the group or something, you can see it. Otherwise... Catherine, that's what Miles does, too. I almost have to hide that toy from him when he's not playing with us, otherwise he wants it all the time. I see you, Gary. Man, I gotta figure out where I'm going for Find a Grave tomorrow.
But here's rhythm and jive, Earl Father Hines and the St. Louis Blues.
Have a good night, Ava. I'll see you in the morning, Beth. Mandatory all-day event. That sounds horrifying. Good night, Kristen. Good night, Nancy. Baxter, that's one idea. I feel like we've been to him before. Last week I had to reconfigure like in the last 2 minutes before Find a Grave started. I was looking for this one detective from a story I had just told about the night before. And then realized, no, this is another guy by the same name. This isn't the detective. Who else is in this cemetery? Hey, Robert. That sucks. Glad you made it. We're going to be wrapping up in just a minute so we can get on to... so it'll be up on the videos page pretty soon. Well, alright everybody, Earl Father Hines is wrapping up, so I suppose it's time that I do the same. Time to plug the upcoming tours. We still got some tickets for Saturday at Rose Hill Cemetery, day after tomorrow. One of my favorite tours to do, honestly. Followed on the Saturday after, we got two of them, Graceland, the True Crime Edition, and H.H. Holmes, The Devil Downtown. Breck's virtual tour is Sunday morning, shopping in Chicago history. Figured if I waited any longer to do this again, it would be too soon to do it again at the holidays. In-person tickets are at MysteriousChicago.com. Also, tomorrow night will be a Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Vasquez Facebook show at 6:30, where we drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. So, again, all kinds of great stuff coming up. And I did, in fact, Katie, get a Dole Whip today. I got one for me and one for Ronnie. They serve them in dishes. It was like a real race against the clock to get home in time as they slowly melted. But all right, thanks everybody for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying stay safe, stay strong, stay hungry. And if you can, of course, everybody,